she learned early how to notice small things. The way people leaned forward when they wanted agreement. The half-second pause before disappointment. The relief that came when someone felt understood. None of it felt like effort. It was closer to breathing. The room would tell her what it needed, and she would become it without thinking. The place she lived reflected that same quiet adaptability. A small apartment with neutral walls, neither warm nor cold, decorated just enough to look intentional. A lamp in the corner cast a soft amber circle across the floor at night. The light never changed. She liked that. Predictable things were easier to match herself against. In the mornings, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than necessary. Not checking her face exactly, more like waiting for it to decide something first. The mirror showed a version of her that always made sense. Calm expression, relaxed posture, someone easy to talk to. Outside, the city moved without noticing her. Shoes against pavement. A distant train. Conversations blurring into sound instead of meaning. She adjusted automatically pace, posture, expression, until she blended into the rhythm around her. It wasn't exhausting. That was the strange part. Only later, when the apartment went quiet again, did the silence feel less like rest and more like an unanswered question. She kept the apartment arranged in a way that never asked questions. Nothing too personal, nothing too empty. Objects existed where they were expected to be, as if they had agreed on their roles long ago. At night, the lamp in the corner filled the room with the same amber light, spreading softly across the floor and stopping just short of the walls. She rarely changed it. Consistency made it easier to settle into herself, whatever version that happened to be. Sometimes she sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the city breathe through the window, cars passing, a voice somewhere below, a sound that reminded her other people were still nearby. She noticed how her posture adjusted even then, shoulders easing into something presentable, her face arranging itself without instruction. When she washed her hands, she caught her reflection in the mirror and held it a moment longer than necessary, as if waiting for a cue. The reflection always complied. Calm, neutral, appropriate. Later, sitting on the floor beneath the lamp, she found herself explaining small thoughts to the room, clarifying intentions that hadn't been misunderstood, softening reactions no one had seen. It felt organized, responsible, like keeping things running smoothly. Only when the sounds outside thinned and the room stopped offering anything to respond did the quiet feel unfamiliar. Not peaceful exactly, but unfinished, as if she were waiting for something that never arrived. Over time, she began to notice patterns, not in the world around her, but in the way she moved through it. Certain expressions appeared more often than others, settling on her face before she consciously chose them. Agreement came easily, sometimes too easily, slipping out before she had finished understanding what was being said. When someone spoke, she felt herself leaning toward their rhythm, matching their pace, their certainty, their hesitation. It was subtle enough to feel polite rather than practiced. On the walk home, she replayed conversations without tension, not to correct mistakes, but to smooth them further, imagining how she might have sounded clearer, lighter, more aligned. Inside the apartment, she continued the habit without realizing it. She stood near the window and formed opinions quietly, adjusting them as if someone might overhear through the glass. When she cooked, she chose meals that felt neutral, foods that required little preference, little commitment. Even music became background rather than choice, something to fill space without shaping it. Sitting on the floor beneath the lamp, she tested thoughts gently, letting them surface, and then reshaping them until they felt acceptable, though she couldn't say to whom. Nothing felt wrong. Everything worked. That was the unsettling part. The ease of it all left no friction, no resistance to push against, only a smoothness that made it difficult to tell where her reactions ended and where she might have begun. The moments when she was alone for longer stretches began to feel different, not heavier, just less defined. Without conversation to follow or expressions to mirror, time seemed to soften around her, stretching in ways that were hard to measure. She would sit at the small table near the window and stare at the grain of the wood, tracing lines with her eyes until they blurred into something abstract. Decisions that once felt automatic now hovered, waiting. She opened the cupboard and stood there, scanning shelves without reaching for anything, not because she was uncertain, but because nothing pulled her forward. When her phone buzzed with a message, she felt a brief sense of relief, a direction offered. Her response shaped itself instantly, precise and appropriate, and the familiar ease returned. Afterward, the quiet came back sharper by comparison. She noticed how her thoughts organized themselves around imagined reactions, how even memories rearranged slightly depending on who she pictured listening. Standing in front of the mirror, she tried holding her face without intention, without readiness, but the expression slipped back into place on its own. Calm, open, understandable. It wasn't distressing. It was efficient. And yet, in the absence of cues, something inside her felt suspended, as if she were paused mid-adjustment, waiting for permission to continue. At some point, she started testing herself in small, quiet ways. Nothing dramatic, just moments where she resisted the instinct to adjust. Sitting alone, she let a thought rise without refining it, without smoothing the edges, and noticed how quickly it felt unfinished, like a sentence waiting for approval. She tried choosing something simple on purpose: what to eat, where to sit, when to turn the lamp off. But each decision arrived without weight, interchangeable with any other. The room didn't respond. The objects stayed where they were. Without feedback, the choices dissolved as soon as they were made. She realized how often her sense of certainty came from reaction, not preference. When there was no one to reflect back at her, her thoughts didn't argue or insist. They hovered, neutral, unclaimed. She caught herself explaining them anyway, quietly, shaping them into something clearer, something easier to receive. The habit was automatic, like straightening a picture frame even when it wasn't crooked. One evening, she stopped mid-thought and let the explanation fall away. The silence that followed wasn't loud or frightening. It was simply empty of direction. She sat there, hands resting in her lap, aware of her breathing, the steady hum of the apartment, and the unfamiliar feeling of not knowing what expression to hold when nothing was asking for one. She began to notice how often she anticipated herself. Before a thought fully formed, another version of it appeared beside it, already adjusted, already softened. It was efficient, almost kind, saving her from having to feel too sharply. When she tried to hold onto the first version, the unshaped one, it slipped away quickly, like something not meant to stay. She wondered when that habit had started, but the question didn't lead anywhere. Memory offered no clear point of origin, only a gradual sense that this was how things had always worked. One evening, she turned off the lamp earlier than usual and let the room sit in dimness, not dark enough to disappear, not bright enough to define. In that in-between light, she felt oddly unanchored. Without a clear setting, her thoughts didn't know how to arrange themselves. She noticed a faint tension in her chest, not panic, just the effort of remaining unfinished. Her phone lay face down nearby, silent. No messages, no reactions waiting. She resisted the urge to imagine one. Instead, she stayed still and let the quiet stretch. The sensation was unfamiliar, not uncomfortable exactly, but exposed, like standing without a shadow. For the first time, it occurred to her that the ease she relied on might not be the absence of effort, but the result of constant, invisible adjustment. And sitting there, without correcting herself, she realized how little practice she had being present without becoming something in response. The realization didn't arrive all at once. It settled gradually, like dust in still air, noticeable only when she stopped moving. She saw how each version of herself had been shaped in advance, prepared for rooms she hadn't entered yet, conversations that hadn't begun. None of it felt false. That was the unsettling part. It all felt reasonable, even considerate. She had learned how to be easy to understand, how to take up just enough space, how to smooth the moment before it could become awkward. Sitting alone, she noticed how that instinct continued without an audience, her thoughts arranging themselves as if clarity were owed to someone. She paused and let a thought remain incomplete, resisting the impulse to finish it properly. The feeling that followed was brief and disorienting, like missing a step in the dark. She realized then that she hadn't been becoming someone else all this time. She had been avoiding the friction of being unformed. Adaptation had given her structure when she didn't know how to choose one herself. The room stayed quiet, the lamp unlit, the city distant and indifferent. Nothing changed in response to her understanding. And yet, something loosened slightly, a permission she hadn't known she was waiting for. Not to define herself, not to decide anything immediately, but to remain unfinished without correcting it, without preparing an explanation, without turning the moment into something easier to receive. She didn't change anything immediately after that. The next days moved forward with the same surface smoothness, the same predictable rhythm. She still spoke when spoken to, still listened carefully, still adjusted without resistance. But beneath it, something had shifted in how she noticed herself. The adjustments no longer felt invisible. She could sense them forming, the familiar pull toward alignment, and sometimes she let them happen without judgment. Other times, she paused just long enough to feel the space where a response usually settled. In the apartment, she left small things undecided on purpose. A chair slightly out of place. The lamp turned on later than usual. Music chosen without concern for how it would sound to anyone else. The room didn't react, and she let that be enough. Sitting near the window one evening, she watched the city lights flicker on and off in no particular order. Each window holding a life she didn't need to imagine herself inside. Her thoughts moved more slowly now, not because they were clearer, but because she wasn't rushing them toward completion. There was no relief in this, no sudden comfort, just a steady, neutral presence. She noticed that the urge to explain herself still appeared, but it no longer felt mandatory. Sometimes she allowed a thought to pass through unshaped, trusting that it didn't need to be useful or understandable to exist. The quiet remained, but it no longer felt like something she had to fix. She started to notice how the world felt when she stopped monitoring herself so closely. Not brighter, not lighter, just less arranged. Conversations passed without being replayed afterward. Moments ended without being refined. When she was alone, she no longer waited for the room to give her direction. Sometimes she sat on the floor beneath the lamp and let her thoughts arrive without order, without checking whether they made sense together. A few of them drifted away unfinished, and she let them go without following. The silence in the apartment remained, but it no longer pressed against her. It settled instead, like air returning to a space that had been held too tightly. She noticed small physical things more clearly: the warmth of the light on her hands, the sound of her breathing when everything else was still, the way time moved when it wasn't being managed. There were moments when she caught herself beginning to adjust again, to prepare a version of herself for someone who wasn't there. When that happened, she didn't stop it forcefully. She just noticed it and sometimes chose not to continue. Nothing dramatic followed. No clarity, no sense of arrival. Just the quiet knowledge that she didn't have to be understandable at every moment. That she didn't have to settle into a shape just because one was available. The city outside kept moving. The room stayed as it was, and within that steady sameness, she remained, not defined, not resolved, but present in a way that no longer required an audience. There were no final decisions waiting for her, no moment where everything settled into place. The days continued with their ordinary shape, and she moved through them without trying to smooth every edge. Sometimes she caught herself mid-adjustment and smiled faintly, not with irony, just recognition. Other times, she let the habit run its course and didn't correct it. Both felt acceptable now. In the apartment, the lamp stayed on some nights and off on others. She stopped noticing when the choice changed. Silence no longer felt like something she had to fill. It became a space she could rest inside without performing, without preparing. Sitting alone, she allowed her thoughts to exist briefly and then pass, unkept, unrecorded. They didn't need to add up to anything. Outside, the city continued its distant movement, indifferent and steady, and she found comfort in that distance. Nothing was asking her to be clear. Nothing required her to explain herself. She understood that she might always be someone who adjusted, who noticed, who responded. That wasn't something to erase. What had changed was the pressure to complete herself for someone else, even in her own mind. She didn't feel finished. She didn't need to. The room held its shape. The quiet stayed gentle.